we definitely have some work to do if we're going to make sure that individuals, working age people within the top 100 metropolitan areas have access to jobs via transit. We found that when we looked across the top 100 metropolitan areas, that the transit service within residential neighborhoods was actually quite good. It was about 70% coverage rate within the top 100 metropolitan areas. But when we looked to see how well those people could access jobs, we found much lower rates. So only about 30% of jobs are available to the typical metropolitan commuter. So there is a paradox between where the transit coverage is serving residential locations and how well people can use that transit system to get to jobs. There's a lot that goes into these trends. Clearly, places that have invested in their transit systems have made sure to look beyond just a rail system, including bus, and have worked on not just neighborhood systems, but connecting across metropolitan areas, seem to fare much better. And we also saw those places that are suffering from decentralization of jobs, what they call job sprawl, places where jobs are maybe concentrated in the center cities in some respects, but are also extensive all across the metro area. It's hard to serve those jobs by transit. They're usually at lower densities, they're usually spread out, and they're not concentrated in such a way that transit works best. So the findings of this report implicate all levels of government. Clearly there are things that the federal government should be doing. They continue to invest in metropolitan transit systems all across the country, using the results from this study to inform how we award those competitive grants, not just around transit, but around other innovative transportation programs, is probably a good idea for the future. We've never really had this kind of data before on a national scale. Now that we have it, this is something that the federal government can certainly utilize when it comes to deciding, based on merits, which places get some of these discretionary grants. On the state level, we've got to make sure that we are not ripping the wires out of these transit systems. As states are really struggling with their own budgetary problems, both this year and into next, some places may think that transit systems are easy targets for budget savings, budget slashing, but really what we want to show in this report is that this is the wrong time to be doing that. We've got to maintain the lifelines that these transit systems provide, particularly to low-income families who are trying to access jobs. It's not just enough to have for somebody to have a job. We've got to make sure that they can get to those jobs. What we found was that the places, particularly in the West, the western part of the country, seem to rank much better in our job access score. These are places that are sometimes hemmed in by mountains and oceans and deserts and things like that, but these are also places that have experimented with innovative land use planning, trying to connect how these metropolitan areas are growing to their infrastructure investments like transit. A place like Denver, a place like Sacramento, a place like Salt Lake City are really pushing the envelope into this next generation planning and practice. But we also found that places, particularly in the South and the Southeast, fare the worst in terms of the job access scores. So these are places like Greenville, places in Tennessee, Birmingham, Alabama, that don't have a lot of public policies geared toward addressing the metropolitan growth patterns, and they're not really connecting up that growth patterns to jobs and infrastructure investments. Unlike other countries, the U.S. is continuing to grow. If we're going to accommodate another 130 million people over the next couple of decades, we've got to think about where that growth is going to be accommodated and in what forms. If we're facing a low-carbon future, we've got to think about this connection between housing, transportation, infrastructure, and employment location. We know largely where that growth is going to be occurring. It's going to be occurring in the West, the Intermountain West, and also in the South. These are the places that really need to focus on information like this for their sustainable future. Those places that have invested in their transit systems are probably better positioned to compete in the 21st century. They're able to focus on amenities like downtowns, revitalizing their older suburban neighborhoods. And then as we start facing some of these larger challenges around gas prices, around energy independence, those places that have a range of alternatives and options are probably going to fare much better.